Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Buff Naggle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
What happens when we
when we get there.
Yes, that's right.
And you know what? The listeners are back. So everyone, they're here. They're listening. Welcome back to Buff Naggle Podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Harry. I'm your host for this evening, this morning, this afternoon, your early or late afternoon drive, commute, whatever you want to call it. If you're sitting on your couch, we welcome you back to the Buff. Rafe, how are you?
Hey, Harry, I'm great. I was just thinking about that. It's morning, noon, or night where they are. But you got to start thinking, what if they're on the space station and it's morning,
well, then it's morning, noon, and night.
All at the same time. It's we're on Martian time or something. Hey, thanks to all our listeners. We have, what do we say, the greatest listeners in the history of the interwebs. We are thankful that you are here, and we really appreciate you guys making us a global top 10% podcast. Remember, you can always send us a note at buffnaggle@buffnaggle.com. Hit the smiley star button, hit the like button, hit the "this is the greatest podcast in the world" button, whatever it is on your machine. Make sure you hit that because that really helps us out. Download extra copies, send them to your friends, tell your friends to listen, and you will get a free episode. And remember, if you can give us a 5-star review, all sorts of wonderful things happen here at the Buff Global Headquarters Studios Extravaganza and Amusement Park. It is it's a great thing when you do things like that for us.
That's right. Now, amusement park is most definitely correct. The kids have a lot of fun there at Grandma and Grandpa's house.
Yeah, it has become that. I looked the other day in the basement, which used to be, clear and pristine and nothing down there other than it's now just littered with toys. I mean, it's
so it's like parenthood all over again.
Well, it is like parenthood, but you know what it is? It's grand parenting, and that is a wonderful thing for it to be. So, Harry, if you're doing a lot of podcasts or even listening to a lot of podcasts, you're going to get thirsty, and you know what you're going to need?
What's that?
A smoothie.
Oh yeah, you know what? I know what you need. You need the BlendJet 2. It's portable, so you can blend up a smoothie at work, a protein shake at the gym, a margarita on the beach, or in your kitchen while you listen to the Buff. It's small enough to fit in a cup holder and powerful enough to blast through tough ingredients like ice and frozen fruit with ease. It's whisper quiet, so you can make your morning smoothie without waking up the whole house. And it lasts for 15 plus blends, recharges quickly via USB-C. And best of all, it cleans itself. Just blend water with a drop of soap, and you're good to go. It's all clean. Squeaky clean. You know what? They got all kinds of colors, all kinds of patterns. I like to use just simple black, and it's classy.
Well, that's because you're a classy guy, Harry. But you know what? Regardless of what kind of class level you have, there's a BlendJet 2 smoothie making blender for you. So the question is, what are you waiting for? Go to the blendjet.com link in our description below and grab yours today. Be sure to use the promo code BuffNagel to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping. No other blender in the market comes close to the quality, power, and innovation of BlendJet 2. They guarantee you will love it or you will get your money back. Blend any time, anywhere with the BlendJet 2 portable blender. Go to the blendjet.com link in the description and use the code BuffNagel to get 12% off and free 2-day shipping. Shop today and get the best deal ever. Harry, we are back talking about our friend Christopher Columbus, the Italian mariner who tried to sail for Portugal and ended up sailing for Spain. And if that wouldn't have worked out, he probably would have sailed for England, or maybe just who knows where he would have sold for.
Give me money and I'll sail for you.
Yeah, that's right. We'll sew for money. Is that what the sign says? Something like that? It's a little cardboard sign. Yeah. So he is in the process of starting a second voyage back to a return voyage to what turns out to be the New World, which he imagined were islands in the East Indies. And he's got 17 ships, 1,200 men, and a cargo of everything. Like we said last time, it was like loading up the family and in the Beverly Hillbillies, everybody in the Jeep, and we're taking everything there.
He's probably got 2 of each animal as well.
He's got them 2 by 2, and he's preparing for that thing. And they go back, and it's interesting because he didn't know. He was well, he said he was certain that he had reached the Indies. But you got to imagine there was a little bit of doubt back there because he wasn't finding the stuff he was supposed to find. And some people said, well, maybe he did. Some people said, no, he just reached some islands. But nobody was thinking massive, like 2 extra continents that we had never dreamed of. And get this, an entire another ocean. No, like the Pacific never comes into discussion because they always talked about the Indian Ocean on the east side of Africa. And you sail the Indian Ocean over to India and then through the islands up around to China and Japan. And then that had to be
if you go further,
the Atlantic.
Then Portugal and Spain.
Right. So that was the Occidental Sea or the Western Sea from the European perspective. And it was the Eastern Sea. But nobody dreamed that new continent was on the line. So
and don't even forget just how big the Pacific is that we know about, right? It's even bigger than the Atlantic.
You can do one of those, like if you have a globe at home, you can spin it so that you're looking at one side of the planet and it's almost, you can turn it so that pretty much the only thing you see are a couple islands around the edge, a little bit of Antarctica and the Pacific Ocean. You can turn it. Oh, and of course, Hawaii's hiding right in the middle there, but it is amazing how big that planet is relative to what they thought and how monumental this discovery is going to be. It's interesting here in the U.S. We're living in the New World, right? In North America. And for us, it's like this idea that, okay, so they found this continent and okay, great. But I think you really can't get your head around that until you have to imagine them like taking up, like take a cantaloupe and put a knife in it from pole to pole and then pull it apart and drop a whole new world right in it. And it had to have been completely mind blowing to all of them because it was not even a considered option.
It's something new entirely.
Yeah. And that's hence the name, the New World. So on May 3rd of 1493, I think it is, Pope Alexander VI, who was actually a Spaniard by birth, he had affirmed that Spain owned these new islands. Okay, he had said this is these are islands way in the west. That is property of Spain by papal decree, and Portugal said, they were like, no, we shouldn't do it this way. Okay. And so they had this big negotiation and what they got to was a precursor to the Treaty of Tordesillas, which is something that comes up when we talk about, if you go back to the Magellan episodes, I forget where they are. They're probably, I don't know, maybe 120 episodes ago. The Treaty of Tordesillas established a line such that to the west of the line, everything belonged to Spain, and to the east of the line, everything belonged to Portugal. And this original line before the Treaty of Tordesillas was 100 leagues west of the Azores and Cape Verde, right? And to the west of the line, things were Spain, and to the east of the line belonged to Portugal, right? And then the Treaty of Tordesillas pushed that another 270 leagues to the west. So it gave Portugal more land. And what that did when they made that adjustment to the line, it pushed the tip of Brazil, that eastern tip of South America, it pushed that into Portuguese territory. And Harry, what language do they speak today in Brazil? Do you know?
I'm pretty sure it's Portuguese, right?
It is Portuguese. 1 point for Harry.
Brazilian and Portuguese.
Brazilian, Portuguese, or Spanglish, maybe something like that. So Columbus's fleet leaves Spain in early October. They get to the Canaries about the 13th of October, and they set a course for just south of Hispaniola, which is the Dominican Republic, Haiti island that they had found before. And they run that latitude across. But they hope to hit just south of that and then find some other things. And they do find some other things. After about 3 weeks of sailing, again, they arrive in, I think these are the Virgin Islands, Harry. They hit Martinique and then Guadeloupe and Antigua, Nevis, St. Kitts, St. Croix, Puerto Rico, and all sorts of other ones, finally reaching their colony that they called La Navidad on November 27th. So they're on a grand cruise of the Virgin Islands.
It's the first ever Caribbean cruise hosted by Christopher Columbus.
It's like what do they have? You could have you go on those fantasy camp tours, or like you go on a cruise with all your with the football heroes of your youth, something like that, and they're all. This is what it was, but this was with Columbus. So he goes island hopping up the Virgin Islands, and he comes to where his colony should be, and it has been burned to the ground. He gets back after it's been a year and a half, 2 years, something like that, and everything is gone. There's no gold. Nobody found any gold. There's no Spanish men left. They had been aggressively raiding the local villages, stealing food, stealing women, stealing gold, and eventually, of course, what would you expect? The locals fought back, and they wiped out the outnumbered and sickly colonists. And but there you go. What do they say? Mess around and find out. Is that the pleasant way to say it? Yeah. So, well, that's what they did, and it's an interesting thing because they were there and they had a colony, but whoever was in charge there didn't do a very good job, I guess is the way to put it. You need leaders that are going to be strong leaders, and I think if you're trying to colonize a certain piece of land, you better behave well and get along with the locals. Otherwise, well, it's going to end like that. So let's not let that happen. So Columbus decides that he's going to rebuild things, but at a different spot on the island, closer to where the supposed gold mines are in the area. And so they do some more local island exploration, but nothing they find seems to match up with what they know. Now the word "know" is in finger quotes here, right, Harry? But what they know about the Far East, Cuba wasn't Chupangu, which was Japan, and Cuba wasn't Cathay, and Haiti wasn't anything as far as they could match up, and nothing was matching up. Cuba seemed to be part of the Asian mainland. That was the thing they thought. They explored
almost like
a long
peninsula.
Yeah, that's what they thought, and that was a question because there are lots of look at a map of Asia. There's a lot of stuff there, a lot of different islands. There's not a really smooth, well-defined.
How are you supposed to differentiate island chain from island chain? Unless you have extensive botany knowledge, and I don't think Mark Watney is part of the trip here with Christopher Columbus.
and it's so easy to point at this and say, how could they be so stupid? How come it's obvious that it's different? But keep in mind that the knowledge they had was like this gigantic several hundred or thousand person chain of telephone, right? That game you play where you say something to somebody, and it's across multiple languages, and the names change, and the cultures are different, and it's been hundreds of years since Marco Polo was over there, and so they're really guessing at these things, and they do explore the length of Cuba on the north side, and they get like 50 miles from the western tip of Cuba. And they decide, screw this, we're going to turn around and come back. It's a peninsula. And they didn't verify that. In fact, Columbus had his men sign some papers that said, yes, we assert, we do hereby assert that it's part of Asia. And that to me is a funny thing that they would do.
Please write the sworn statement. Everybody, collaborate on this, corroborate. Right, that's the right word.
Collaborate. They would collaborate or corroborate. No, their stories would corroborate, I think. We'll have an English person on sometime. Being very smart. Yes, they did corroborate or collaborate or work together to come up. Yeah, they came up with a statement that it was part of the mainland, and so they went all over the place, and they came back to Hispaniola to work on their settlement and actually think about what they were doing. And you have to keep in mind what Columbus was like, what the zeitgeist was, the spirit of the age, what they were thinking about, what they knew and what they didn't know, and the nature of man on the planet and all sorts of things. And the going, I guess I'll call it the theory or the mindset, was that Eden was in the East, and humanity and civilization started in Eden in the East. And then man, once he got kicked out of Eden because he sinned, don't eat apples, don't try to get knowledge that you're not supposed to have, right?
Don't trust strange women in lakes handing out apples.
Yes. Okay, that's from the Monty Python thing, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, all right. It's okay. So, side note, that's from the "Don't trust what ladies pulling swords out of rocks or something, lakes or."
No, strange women in lakes handing out swords is by no means a system of government.
Okay, right. Okay, that's a Arthurian legend kind of thing.
Sure.
Okay.
Anyway,
right.
back on topic.
Okay. So man starts in the east and progresses west. So they kept seeing progress as going, like if you're looking at the globe, going from right to left. It is, so China was this old, sophisticated, very exciting place, and things moved across there. And eventually, like if you're standing on the edge, that's the only coast. Well, there's the southern coast, the western coast of Portugal, or the western tip of Spain. You're thinking, I'm here. I'm at the end of the world. This is the progress. This is the end of civilization. We have achieved everything we need. All right. And so you can go back through biblical history and all sorts of other world history kinds of things, and you get this march from east to west. Okay. So there's this idea that Solomon's mines provided the gold to cover the temple in Jerusalem. All right, that's where the gold came from, and they were in the east. They were in a place called Ophir, and in Columbus's time, the going theory was that Ophir was actually the Malay Peninsula. So you've been there, right, Harry? You've been to Malaysia?
I have not been to Malaysia.
Didn't you go to Malaysia on that trip?
No, I was in Thailand.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, so Harry hasn't been there, but apparently Solomon was. All right, but that was the idea of where the gold was. It was from the Malay Peninsula. So Columbus is all he's got are the documents of the age and the data on the ground there in the Caribbean, which is quite literally on the ground. I mean, it's not like he's flying in a satellite looking down from above. So he puts all these things together, and he starts to come to this realization that his mission is like is part of the final mission of man, to bring Christ and Christendom the rest of the way around the world and complete the circle. Right? So he took on the name Christopher because that means Christ bearer, right? And he saw this as a component of his divine mission, was to bring Christianity the rest of the way around and complete that circle. So he was under the impression that Ferdinand was essentially the new King David who would restore the temple. They were going to find enough gold here in the Malay Peninsula, just like Solomon had, to fund operations to return Jerusalem to Christian hands. And so all of these things are pointing to him being in the Indies. And all he's got to do is locate this Ophir, this Malay Peninsula, and it's got to be around here somewhere, because I'm in the Indies.
It's just around the corner.
Right. So the spiritual map of the age gets mixed and merged with the Ptolemaic maps, and it convinces Columbus that Hispaniola and Chipangu and Ophir might all be one and the same thing, and he is like really close to this great big find. And I know if you're listening to this and you're kind of rolling your eyes and shaking your head a little bit, and you're saying, well, this is wacky. This is an insane thing. But you have to put yourself in Columbus's shoes, okay, on the deck of the boat in the late 1400s, and you only have the data you have, and you have the theories that you have, and you can see that confusion. There's nothing about what he's seeing currently that makes any sense relative to these maps and stuff. But if he can tie this together, then everything will be aligned, and we will have achieved the mission we need to achieve.
Right. And it's, I'm sure there's people out there who say like, well, he didn't have all the information. He didn't have all the maps because the Vikings and the Nordics were going back and forth to Canada. So they knew that there was a continent out there. So, well, I don't think Christopher Columbus, had his cousins up in Norway, passing along information and texting it back and forth. So he's doing the best he can with the information that he has.
Right. And that's where you have to be really careful about in both directions, right? You can't and this is an error they made, was thinking that they knew everything, right? I mean, there's a little humility goes a long way. On the other hand, you can't point fingers at him and say, you're just an idiot. You should have known that, because nobody knew that. People living in Central Africa didn't know that. People living in China didn't know that. The Aborigines in Australia didn't know that. And whoever was hanging out in New Zealand, they didn't know that. So, it's really hard to get global information when it travels so slowly and gets corrupted that easily across languages and distance and time. And there's no satellite photos. That's coming. but not in Columbus's age. So, and then the other thing, at least from the European perspective, and I think from the perspective of pretty much everybody on the Europe, Asia, Africa, giganto landmass, is that there was having another continent out there was just something that could not be. It was not on any of the models. They knew there might be islands here or there, but having a continent the size of North and South America, that was not a thing. That was not a thing. So they had been setting up this new colony here on Hispaniola. And then Columbus, of course, is going around exploring other things, trying to find stuff. And then when he finally gets back to Hispaniola, the colony was in complete disarray, right?
Imagine that.
Yeah. Yes. Now we're 0 for 2, right? And, it's death, disease, turmoil, social, political unrest, famine, all sorts of bad things. And everybody says, well, who's at fault here, Harry?
Well, it's got to be Columbus, right?
Of course, because he's the leader, right? So, right, he hadn't been there, but things still went to hell in a handbasket. And he'd been exploring these other islands, and remember, there were 17 ships that came over. So they weren't all just hanging out there. Some were going back and forth and going to get stuff. And news gets back to Spain, and the Spaniards find this out, and they were like, well, we better send somebody. So they send people over to investigate what's going on with Columbus. And by 1496, Columbus is back in Spain, trying to defend his name, defend his accomplishments and his reputation. So things are starting to sour for old Chris. Ferdinand and Isabella give him permission to return for a third journey to get things under control and to find that gold that everybody knew had to be there, right? And he works 2 years in Spain to cobble together another 6 ships and a crew of, we're going to get a crew, Harry. How about going to the local jail and say, hey, we'll let you out of jail if you cruise this ship.
That sounds like when you set up a colony, nothing bad's going to happen.
No, you're going to get the best of the best of the best, right? And you're going to go there, and they're all going to follow the rules. They're going to be respectful of local customs. They're going to be, diligent, hardworking, not self-centered, that sort of thing.
Right.
Because they all played youth sports, and they know how to work as a team. All right, so Columbus is going to come back again in May of 1498, but in this 6-year period from 1492, when he takes off and when he decides to go back for the third journey in 1498, news of things that are happening west in the Western Atlantic, news is starting to get out. And people are starting to find other things. In the north, like you said just earlier, Harry, the English are exploring farther and farther west in search of things like fish and timber and whatever else you find going along.
Beavers, maple syrup, Tim Hortons.
They were looking for donuts. That's a thing that the English got from the Canadians were donuts. We need a little. If this were a video podcast, there'd be a little button that would go up and it would say sarcasm or hyperbole.
Click here for our recipe for donut holes.
Or there'd be a little coupon. Click here to save. Yeah, this episode sponsored by Tim Hortons. You can get
if only
you can make a donut smoothie if you had a BlendJet 2 and some Tim Hortons donuts. Okay, so the English are going up along the top, and they're pretty much, I guess I'm going to put it in finger quotes here. They're hugging the coastline, much like the Portuguese were doing going around Africa. Although the coastline was a little bit more sporadic. You got to get up to Iceland, which is a little tricky, and you got to get to Greenland, which is tricky, and you got to get but none of those are massive. It's not like going across the Indian Ocean or going across the Atlantic or worse yet, going across the Pacific.
Right.
right? So it's not quite like that. So they push on past Iceland and Greenland into eastern Canada, and there's a guy. The main guy is this merchant named John Cabot, and I don't know if you've heard his name, but that's a name I remember from 3rd and 4th grade. In fact, Cabot used to hang out with Ferdinand and Isabella in 1493, and he was aware of Columbus, but he decided that Columbus really wasn't much of a big deal, and he was dismissive of his accomplishment. So our friend Toby Lester says the following. He seems to have decided fairly quickly that Columbus was all talk. Columbus hadn't come home with any valuable spices and hadn't found any of the places or peoples described by Marco Polo. All he had done was discover a few islands on the way to Asia. But the men of Bristol, on the other hand, the English explorers, they had actually made an important discovery, he seems to have decided, although almost nobody was talking about it. If the long coastlines that they had discovered at the much higher latitude was indeed a mainland, as it appeared to be, then it had to be some desolate northern portion of the Asian coastline. This gave Cabot an idea. While Columbus and his colonists were frittering they were eating fritters. They were frittering away the resources of Spain on Hispaniola, Cabot could sail west from England to this newly discovered mainland, follow it south, and eventually reach the lands of the Great Khan. So this is Cabot's idea.
Up in China.
He's going to end up in China, but keep in mind that he had a different plan, but it still ends up at the same false point that Columbus had, is that they were really in China. He just sees the northern part as Kamchatka or whatever, that the place in, when you play Risk, it's that piece way up on
the bridge that goes back in between Alaska and Asia. Yeah.
So they figured that, and we must be up here somewhere. We're here doing this thing. So Cabot goes to the King of England, who was King Henry VII. And the king grants his rights to make discoveries for England in the eastern, western, and northern sea. So go out there, stay along the northern line. You find something, then come on back. So Cabot goes away sailing and exploring. And by May of 1497, he has firmly established there was a big landmass out there. He had reached Labrador and Newfoundland, which of course he thought was part of mainland China. So he comes back, he tells the king. The king says, keep going, grab some more ships. So Cabot grabs 5 more ships, and he heads to the west along the northern part and disappears.
Well, he probably fell over the edge of the world.
Well, see, that's the problem. When you're way up north, there is a hole. And he fell in the hole.
That's where the axis is for your globe, right? And there's a big rod in the middle.
Well, if you look at that, if you look at your globe, there's a place it's going to be a problem. No, okay, so Cabot goes out and he never comes back. And that's kind of a problem. Now, there's some evidence, apparently. Lester says there's some thin evidence or fragile evidence that his team actually sailed west and then south along the American coast, or the western coast of the Atlantic. And they met their doom somewhere in contact with the Spanish near Hispaniola. So but the evidence is very thin and fragile, and it's hard to know what to make of it. Anyway, Columbus gets word via a letter that Cabot had found China, but Columbus says, well, that can't be because Cabot's data didn't line up with Columbus's data. And of course, nobody's data lines up, because you know where they're not, Harry?
Well, they're not in China. They're not in the West Indies.
they are in the West Indies. They're not in the East Indies. Right? Yeah. So that's why it didn't line up. So Columbus plans his 1498 voyage, his third voyage, to go even further south than before. He wants to go see more of these islands that are down to the south. So the English are going along the north. Columbus is zipping along through the central Atlantic, and meanwhile the Portuguese, though, don't forget those guys. They said, you know what, we're just going around Africa. Our buddy Diaz did that. He went across the Indian Ocean. He made it back. We're going to send a bunch of ships. Vasco da Gama, you have been chosen, and he's going to go out there, and he's going to go down the coast of Africa and to the Indies. So he took 4 ships in July of 1497 in an effort to reach Calicut. And by May of 1498, when Columbus left, he didn't know yet what had happened to Vasco da Gama. But everybody knew that, you know what, the race is on. There is something there. We have got to go. We can. There is stuff to the west. We can get to something.
Who's going to find the fastest route there?
Yeah, who's going to find the fastest route? And well, fastest and practical, right? If it's really fast and you get and you can't do it repeatedly, or there's a problem, then that's going to be a thing. So the Portuguese are heading around Africa. The Spanish with Columbus are going across the Mid-Atlantic, and English are going around the north. And they're all converging on something that they cannot fathom as knowable, right? And that's that concept that there's another continent there. They're all doing a thing, and they're pointing in exactly the wrong direction.
And there's two of them. There's a North and South America.
And they're connected.
Right.
Okay. And so that's part of the issue. And that shows up in some of these maps that eventually they're going to see that there was something to the south and there was something to the north. And the question is there a path through there? And, Teddy Roosevelt hadn't dug the Panama Canal yet. He did that by hand, Harry. It was just Teddy Roosevelt with a shovel.
That's what I heard.
And a good buddy from high school.
And his Rough Riders.
His Rough Riders. Yeah, that's the lesson I learned on the Buff, is that Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders dug the Panama Canal.
We are historically accurate here.
Yeah, that's right. So, but the Panama Canal wasn't there. The closest thing to a passage was the Strait of Magellan. And we covered that back 2 years ago in the Magellan episode. So go look those up. So Columbus leaves Spain in May of 1498, and he goes south to the Canaries, just like he did before. But this time he continues even further south down to the Cape Verde Islands, which is about 10 degrees north of the equator. And then he heads west. And this is early July, and this is a very, very, very hot voyage. Things go very bad for them on the voyage. They run into a place of absolutely zero wind, and they sit there for like a week in the middle of the Atlantic, and it's like 1,000,000 degrees. Harry, the water casks burst. Like they snapped the how you make
the rings.
They broke and they were running out of water and things were really bad. But eventually this wind picked up and they made it across. They landed. They saw an island, and they saw some three hills on top of the island, and they said we're going to name that for the Trinity, and we were going to call that island Trinidad. And if you pull up your map of the Caribbean, Trinidad is like the last island before South America along that ring of
chain. Yep.
Yeah, of how that ring goes down there. And so they hit Trinidad, and so they get some water there, and they're sailing around in just west of Trinidad. And there's a little bay there, a little gulf. It's called the Gulf of Paria. And they noticed that this water was very, very sweet. They called it sweet, which meant that it was rather
just
fresh,
not salty.
Well, it wasn't as salty as seawater, right? I mean, so it's all gradient, right? It's not like there's seawater and fresh water. There's just a question of how much salt is in it. So they figured a large river must be nearby, and they find that they do a couple day trips, and they go south, a couple kilometers, couple tens of kilometers, and they find
leagues, all those nautical terms.
Yes, that's right, leagues, or maybe nautical miles.
Fathoms is depth, right? 6 feet is 1 fathom is 1.
I think you could measure a fathom horizontally, but you tend to do it vertically, right? Is that?
I think so.
All right, so
we'll join the Army, not the Navy.
We'll get Brock to tell us if you could measure fathoms horizontally. So they figure a large river has got to be nearby, and they find this huge delta for the Orinoco River, which drains a large part of South America. They find the mouth of this river, this delta, and there's 4 large branches of this that dump fresh water into the Atlantic there. And Columbus is, keep in mind, he's got this idea that he's out there to reconnect civilization back with Eden, and he comes up with the following. By August 13th, they had come up with an answer as to why the water was so sweet. The several islands ringing the Gulf were actually all parts of a single coastline. Based on the amount of fresh water pouring into the Gulf, the land behind the coastline had to be very big, so big, in fact, that it couldn't be an island at all. I have come to believe, Columbus wrote, that this is a mighty continent that was hitherto unknown. It was a prophetic guess. Columbus and his men had reached the coast of South America, specifically the delta of the great Orinoco River, which spills out from modern-day Venezuela into a gulf still known today as the Gulf of Paria. But just 4 days later, on October 17th, Columbus changed his mind. He hadn't found a new continent at all. He decided he had found the oldest one of all. He had reached the outskirts of the earthly paradise. He had made it home.
I have found Eden.
I have found, yes. And he was completely convinced of that. Now, the earthly paradise was now considered, like, in the age that Columbus was sailing, the earthly paradise was considered a real thing. It was a place, and everybody had descriptions of this thing. And what Columbus had found was something that seemed to match this. And this did more and more to reinforce his idea that they had made it back to Eden. And we are going to leave this episode with him there on the edge of the earthly paradise. And we will pick up next week with, well, what he found on the earthly paradise, and then his fourth voyage there to the New World a couple years later.
That's right. And I think it's interesting that, you know, there's probably a little bit of confirmation bias here, right? It's like, I'm uniting the circle. I am doing all these things. There's the King David. There's the gold. There's all of these things moving into the Western world, but going back east the other way around. And now there's the Four Rivers. This is all perfect. It matches my own ideas.
Well, but nowhere on it, it's interesting. You have, like, in science, you have models, right? And statistics, you have models, and what you do is the model helps you describe what you have seen and predict what you're going to see. And nowhere in the statistical model of what will happen when we sail west, nowhere in there was there a little very, a small probability of hitting another continent. I mean, that's like saying, what happens when I take a baseball and I put this spin on it and I throw it to the plate? Nowhere in the model is, the baseball will turn into a frisbee. Right? I mean, it's just it's not a thing this was not.
It wasn't a concept at all.
And you can say it's a failure of imagination, but, like, nothing for 6,000 years had pointed to them, other than some obscure writings in Aristotle about Atlantis and stuff like that. Other than that, there's nothing that points to anything out there. And when Columbus did find these islands, and they kind of, they're tropical islands, and there's people there, and there's lots of little islands, and, like, well, this is probably it. Well, what are you going to think?
What else is it going to be?
What else would it be? What else could it be? And so now he has found the earthly paradise, and he's going to wrap that up next time when we talk about Columbus.
That's right. Just like Columbus seeking his greatest good, we encourage everybody to seek the good, be the good, and spread the good, and enjoy the adventure of life.